Hi, everyone. We're just waiting as our attendees come and join us after lunch. So I'll just get started and introduce myself again, although I think everybody that I can see on the call, I think has been with us most of the time. I'm Mary Bergman. I'm the Executive Director of the Nantucket Preservation Trust. You are watching Rescuing History. This is our last session, this big our last block, let's say. We've got two sessions in the day, 2 sessions left. And we're continuing our discussion of solar. We started the day off by learning about what are the things that one can do to weatherize a building, to make an older building as energy efficient as can be. And then we heard from Holly Backus at the town of Nantucket, where she reminded us that the greenest building is the one that's already built. And she also shared with us some pretty impressive metrics about just how much solar Nantucket's Historic District Commission has approved in the last 2 years, especially. And now we're digging in a little bit further. I'm going to sit down with some homeowners, some Nantucketers here, and learn about what their experiences were like going through that process, what made them want to put solar on their house or near their house. And then we will telescope out a little bit and go back and chat with the folks at the Envision Resilience Challenge and learn about what do they see for Nantucket going forward. So I'm happy to have with us today a couple of Nantucket homeowners. Maureen Bousa is a graduate of Wellesley College and Boston College, and she served on nonprofit boards for 3 decades, with a particular emphasis on the arts, historic preservation, and community service. Her current affiliations include the Nantucket Book Festival, the Clark Art Institute, and the Community Foundation for Nantucket. And Mickey Rowland was most recently the principal of Milton Rowland and Associates, an architectural design firm on Nantucket that operated from 1982 until his retirement in 2019. Mickey received a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the University of Vermont. Although he's retired, Mickey is doing an awful lot these days. He's a current board member of Nantucket Preservation Trust. He serves as the chairman of both the HDC's Historic Structures Advisory Board and the Nantucket Commission on Disability. He's also an active member of the Nantucket Historical Commission. And Barbara Von Der Groeben graduated from Skidmore College with a BS in nursing and the University of California, San Francisco with an MS in adult cardiovascular nursing. She retired, in quotes, to Nantucket in 2014. As you can see, every retired person on Nantucket is really doing like the work of somebody who's working full time, is what I have learned. And she came out of retirement in February 2021 to do a lot of very important work with the Nantucket Fire Department and the Nantucket Health Department to vaccinate homebound Nantucketers with COVID-19 vaccines. And then at the VFW with the hospital, and currently with the Nantucket Health Department in the on-island vaccines. Previous to the pandemic, she worked with the Nantucket Fire Department on the Generation Safe program, ensuring that seniors have adequate smoke and carbon monoxide detectors and general home safety. So there's a lot of different passions that people have here: history, public health, the arts, architecture, accessibility. I think it's all interconnected, but I'd love just to ask all of you to tell us a little bit about how long you've lived on Nantucket and kind of what drew you to Nantucket. How did you end up out here 30 miles out to sea?
So I can start. I've been on Nantucket since 1980. I came to the island after graduating from college, and I worked for an architect on Main Street for a couple of years before opening my own design firm. Got married on the island and have raised 2 children here and basically been here ever since. Recently retired and actually spending quite a bit of time in Vermont these days.
How about you, Maureen?
I first came out to Nantucket in '93. It was for actually an investment conference with my husband and 2 little children. And we had spent time on the Cape previously, but as soon as I got out here, I said, this is amazing. So we started renting after that. And 2 more children later, I finally said, you know what, I think it's time to put down some roots here. So we bought a place in 2003 and have enjoyed it ever since. And in the meantime, you know, all the children have had summer jobs here. One has been married. I'm now a grandma. I mean, so it's been a magical spot to spend summers.
I guess I'm next. So my family started coming here in 1964. Classmates of my parents from college had a home in Sconset. My family started renting in Rowland. Fast forward, spent most of my adult life in Northern California in the Bay Area. But I bought my home on Upper Main Street with family members in 2003. In 2007, after buying out one of the family members, we added dormer windows and popped out the upstairs, which allowed the angle of my home to really be solar friendly. But I moved here temporarily in 2011 and 12 just to try it out in the winters, which everybody thought was weird. Moved back to California and said, I'm done, and moved here permanently in 2014, which with all the fires in Northern California ended up being a really good move. And so I've been involved. I've done some volunteer work with the Red Cross and then with the fire department and just, you know, other miscellaneous volunteering.
Great, great. That's a good, now that opportunity, I'm going to share my screen and just kind of walk through some of the, just so folks can see some of the installations that we're going to talk about next. Okay. So here's Maureen's house up on Cliff Road. So we're going to look at some of these pictures, just so everybody has kind of an idea of what we're talking about when we're looking. Now over on Main Street. So you can just sort of see those dormer windows. And then, can you see the solar installation here?
You have to really look for it.
When I went out there this morning, I couldn't. Yeah, it's pretty amazing out at Mickey's house.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, now that we've seen some of those, and maybe we'll just leave this up. Maybe we'll look at Barbara's house, because Barbara, you'd mentioned how you put these dormer windows on in 2007, and how that was, you know, one of the things that I was kind of giving everybody a little bit of an overview this morning about some of the, you know, preservation standards, secretary standards, some of the theories, the idea of, you know, reversibility, things that you can do to a building. Obviously, then we heard from Holly Backus at the town, and obviously one of the biggest guidelines of the Nantucket Historic District Commission as they relate to solar is wanting to make sure that there's a low to no visibility. And we were talking about how places like Boston and New York that have these tall buildings that have flat roofs, that might have like a parapet that's going to shield things. Maybe it's a little easier on Nantucket. The pitches of the roofs are really steep. And, you know, I think it's so interesting that you mentioned that adding those dormers is really what allowed you to do this. So since we're looking at Barbara's house, Barbara, what made you want to pursue solar, especially in a spot like on Upper Main Street? I think this is one of the only homes that's really like in the heart of that old 1955 historic district that has solar on the roof.
Right. Well, 2 things. One is my caretaker has solar at his property, but he's out like more mid-island. My next door neighbors at 130 Main put solar on the back of their house. And when they were up there putting it on, I was like, what are you guys doing? And they were adding solar. But because it doesn't face, the backside of their house doesn't face Main Street at all, it was, I mean, they have huge solar. So if you look at the dormers, especially in the picture that I see on my right, when we bought the house in 2003, it had been a B&B, and we bought it as an investment property and as an income producing property, which it never was. And when it was with the approval to do the dormers. So in 2007, we popped off the roof. So you can see the original roof line. And instead of just making like discrete little windows, one of the architect friends of my nephew's said, you'll have much more living space if you do it the way it's done now. So because it's almost flat, you can really hardly see that. You really have to be looking for it to see that there's solar up there. So that enabled it to go through HDC with the proviso that I had to get a new roof put on, and had to make sure that it wouldn't contrast. But it ended up being a really smart move, I think, on my part.
Yeah. And Mickey, you were sitting on the Historic Structures Advisory Board when this application came through, right?
That's true. I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And our only concerns with that was just that you really couldn't see it from Main Street, and because of the shallow pitch on those dormers, it turned out to be successful. It was, you might see a sliver of the edge of it, but not much at all.
Yeah, well, when it was going through HDC, they had to put up, like a mock-up of what it was going to look like, and it was, even though I had to do a new roof. The roof was already about 14 years old and was starting to wear. So putting on a new roof, in retrospect, is a good thing, because if I ever had to put on a new roof under solar, was going to be a real challenge. So the HDC actually did me a favor.
You don't hear that all the time.
I know. Actually, I mean, because the Act Solar did it. They did all of the paperwork and all of the pushing it through HDC, and they were really easy to work with. But it didn't take that long. I mean, other people I've heard, takes months and months and months, but it took only just like a couple of tries to get it through.
Yeah. Were you able to take advantage of any of the tax credit opportunities?
No, I did get one rebate, and now I'm getting, I get a thing that tells me that it's a bill, but it's always zero. And then I see in my checking account that money has been deposited.
Wow. Yeah.
It's going to take a while to pay me back, but I'm not paying out anymore.
Right. Wow. So I think you, of the three homeowners, you're our most recent installation. Let's go back over to Cliff Road, because I think, Maureen, you said you were one of the first installations. This was 2008?
Yeah, 2008, 2009. We were interested in trying solar because it was kind of like a new industry. We wanted to see, well, what did this really mean? Like, can it really work? It seemed like a good hedge against energy costs. And it also appealed to us with the concept of, let's try to be a little more green. So at that point, there wasn't anybody on island doing solar installation. So we had to go off island to Katuitt Solar. And they helped us through the process, and there was some kind of tax rebate that went towards the kind of installation cost. And of course, we were lucky enough that the stars were aligned, and the best place to put it was on the side of the house that did not face the street. So we had literally no issues with the HDC, which I wouldn't say was true in other aspects of building on the property, but in this aspect, it was a win. So we have had a very easy time with it. I think we had one issue where we had to do a little tweak to the system very early on, and since then, it has operated very nicely for us. And as you can see in the photos, it does get as much sun as Nantucket offers.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. It's not, somebody this morning brought up, isn't there more wind on Nantucket than sun? And the answer might be yes, but
Yeah.
so what is what's the draw like on a cloudy day?
Well, it's moderated by a cloudy day. It's interesting that you bring up wind because we did investigate doing some kind of windmill, but the challenge was our lot was deep but narrow. And if you put up a windmill, if it ever fell, it had to fall on your property. So we did not put up a windmill that was high enough to make a difference because the property was so narrow. So that led us to thinking about solar. The solar we produce goes straight to the grid, and our bill is moderated by that. We never get to zero. So Barbara, you win. But it does give us a benefit, and through the state and their credits, we do get a little check like once a year for kilowatts that we have produced. So it doesn't make a huge difference, but it does make you feel good.
Yeah. All right, let's if I can get the screen to work. Yeah, it's pretty neat. Okay, so it's on
the south facing side of the house.
Yep. All right. To Mickey. So Mickey, when did you build the house, and then when did you do the installation?
Well, we built our house in 1988, so it's been there for quite a while. And in 2018, just a few years ago, we decided to investigate putting solar on it, and we talked to a couple different companies. We ended up going with AxSmart, and they came out, and the biggest decision we had was whether to go with roof mounted versus ground mount. And our house was probably a little bit like Maureen's, where we had a good south facing roof, but we could fit more. The roof planes were broken up so much that it made more sense for us to put it on the ground. And we had plenty of room to do it in the back of the property. We don't even really see it from our house. So that was the only concern about the ground mount was that we had to pay for a trench to put the cables in to get from the back behind the house up to the house. And we had to clear a number of pine trees. You can see in this picture, there's like some pretty mature pines around it. And we had to clear probably 6 or 7 pine trees that were going to either shade the panels or possibly be a risk if they fell and landed on the solar array. So we cleared those out.
Great. So I imagine because this is not something that can be seen from the street, you didn't have any issues getting installed.
No, in fact, actually, we did go to the HGC initially to have it put on the roof, and then changed our minds later to put it on the ground. And in both cases, our house was pretty invisible from a public way, so it was not a concern.
Mm-hmm. Since you're in a unique role sitting on an advisory board, what are some of the things that like you're looking at when an application comes through for solar on a roof?
Well, I guess it depends where it is. I mean, I actually, on the Historic Structures Advisory Board, I'm only dealing with downtown structures. So we really don't really want to see it at all from a public way. I think if there was, we have possibly approved some from, a side street or a street behind the house where it's really just marginally visible. Trees shaded or different buildings block it entirely. But it's a pretty foreign element to an old Nantucket house, so we really just don't want to see them to be too glaringly visible.
Mhm. Have you seen the technology change at all, just in the time that you've been sitting on the board or paying attention to these things?
Personally, I haven't seen anything except submitted to the Historic Structures Board. I haven't seen anything but the typical solar panel array.
Cool, excellent. I wanted to ask Maureen, now you've got a background in historic preservation. Yes. Is that right, Maureen?
Yeah, well, I sat on the board of Historic New England for 17 years. So I got to learn a little.
Yeah, I just wonder what sort of, considerations do you think, or what am I trying to say? What about my questions here? What would you tell a homeowner who was considering going through this process? Do you think was it worth it?
Look, we were very lucky about the orientation of our home. So it is as discreet as it can be. And I'm actually taking this photo from a second floor porch of our guest house. So this is a view that only someone on our property would have. So otherwise, you really don't know it's there. And I think that's a big bonus, because I think we all enjoy kind of the fantasy of being on Nantucket. That
is a great way to put it. Yeah.
Like back in time. And that's actually a good fantasy. I mean, we all there's a reason why we're here, because it speaks to us. But I do think you can embrace new technologies and make them work for you and for the planet, and apply them in certain situations that is a win-win all around. And I think that's particularly important when you're on an island, because getting all that energy from off island comes with a cost. And if there's a way that we can participate in a positive fashion, let's do that. So I am a proponent of solar. I think if I saw solar arrays on the front of a building, on Main Street, it would be a little off-putting, so I wouldn't vote for that. But the applications we're seeing here today, I think, are all very appropriate and kind of a win.
Yeah, it makes, it's interesting just to think about the work at Barbara's house and how putting in those dormers was the thing that really gave her that shallow roof plane to be able to, for lack of a better phrase, to get away with this. It's such a, relatively highly visible, highly significant location. We were talking earlier this morning about how each individual site is so unique, and will have unique challenges to address and to discuss, and how, it's not necessarily precedent setting what happens at one house, because they have to be, everything has to be taken into account. I also want to remind our folks watching at home that if you have any questions for these folks who've gone through this process, to please put them in the chat or the Q&A. Or is there anybody out here watching who also has solar array at their historic house that has not, that I did not bug, to please let us know, or anybody that's considering it, or would just love to hear more from the folks who are watching as well.
One other thing about my house is, because I face north, I'm getting morning and afternoon sun. So my solar panels are getting sun practically as soon as the sun comes up till it goes down.
And does it have to be really sunny, or is it?
No, I don't. I just think you just need to have more light than anything. I really don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, as I said, one of the things that got me going on it was my next door neighbor. And again, it's the backside of his house, which you don't see from Main Street. And I think the only people that could see my panels would be my neighbors that have a roof that, you know, they're up on the second floor and they could probably see the top of my roof.
Well, I guess that would be my next question is, and you don't have to answer this, everyone, but has anybody, like, did you have any abutters or neighbors that piped up when you went through this process?
In a positive way, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you're like, yeah, good on you. But no one's giving me any, they haven't had any issues with it.
Yeah. Mickey, you were in the design world for many years. Have you worked on any projects where solar was part of a new design, or?
No, solar, I think, is really taken off pretty recently, and you know, many of our projects involved summer homes, and the focus wasn't so much on year-round sustainability, that kind of thing. So I have to say, I mean, I think we probably did have some applications, but very few. I think it's definitely becoming much more of a current trend, which is a great thing. So no, not really.
Yeah, I think we're all really interested to see what happens next with, you know, solar shingles. That was one thing we were talking to Nathaniel Green about yesterday, is just where is that technology. I think a lot of people, especially on Nantucket, in a place where aesthetics is really important to the local historic district, having something that's, you know, minimally visible will be interesting. And on Nantucket too, we don't really have a lot of trees. There were some pretty big trees out on Deer Run Road, but if you compare our little pine trees to trees in the real world, there's not much. So not a lot to block the sun. It's really interesting just to see the different. So Barbara, it's just the two on the dormers right here.
No, both sides of the house.
Both sides of the house.
Both the east side and the west side. So the one where you can see the balcony, I think more of the east side of the house, and the one that I'm looking at that's on the right, that's on the west side of the house. So both of those sets of dormers have solar on them. So I've got I think I've got 20 panels. But you know, I really credit the fact that my neighbor put it on and my caretaker was sort of pushing it, and it's like, yeah. But I also, having lived in Northern California, I remember when all the windmills went up in Altamont Pass, and you know, one of my friends said, you know, my daughter's never going to know these hills without windmills, and I went, yeah, but we're getting energy. I mean, makes sense to me. But
well, you're right. I think it's about those trade-offs. It's interesting to see what do people see. Not everybody sees the same thing when they see solar and wind. And you know, we were talking this morning about visual intrusions and sort of like what have we gotten used to, and how the eye is able to, you know, well, I guess on Upper Main, well, no, they do put power lines on Upper Main Street. But in some places on the island, the power lines are buried, and in other places, the power lines are these huge sagging things. But I mean, I think that's kind of the question in the heart of historic preservation, especially, is just looking and wondering what are those trade-offs. We're seeing that a lot, I think, with the streets, with the cars, as we widen the street to allow for these larger trucks, which bring our food from the mainland because we're out here in the middle of nowhere. They're not easy questions, and I'm glad that we have a lot of people thinking about them. And had any challenges? Everything was so easy.
You know, Mary, one thing that I could add is that, and I haven't done this yet, but now that, you know, my panels have been installed and I'm getting quite a bit, in fact, I'm getting a little more energy than I'm using. So I actually have a surplus on my electric bill. And what that probably means is that going forward, I'll probably decommission my propane heating system and install an electric heat pump. And I'm also considering replacing my gas-driven vehicle with a plug-in, hybrid or a plug-in car, in which case I wouldn't need to go to the gas stations on Nantucket anymore. It'd be basically all free energy. So it might lead to other changes in the house or your lifestyles that could help benefit us too.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yesterday, Nathaniel Green was telling us about a plug-in Ford F-150 that had a refrigerator in where the engine would be in the trunk. And the idea that, I'm wondering, Maureen, I think you're here in the summers, but and he and Barbara, your installations were both after this, but I was thinking about the Juno storm where we were without power for 4 days out here. And are we going to see more of that kind of extreme weather event? And so the solar is not just a way to, help with your energy bill and your, but also to, as we think about these catastrophic storms and to be able to make your own home more resilient in the face of storms. Have we had any power outages where you didn't go down?
Well, the thing is that when I got mine, I could have paid a chunk of change extra, a big chunk of change to get a battery backup and also hook it up to a generator, but I elected not to do that. So I think that when you look at the cost of it, that does, if I were to try with a battery backup, I think it added quite a bit more, and I elected not to. But after Superstorm Juno, when the inside of my house got down to 45 degrees, I put in a wood burning stove, in which fit nicely into my fireplace. So if we ever had lost power again, I have the propane range, and so I can heat the water for my coffee, but I can also heat my house. And that was the motivation for putting in the wood burning stove, which I don't use all that often, but it's nice to have it as a backup.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Maureen, when you're not here, are you in DC?
Oh, pardon?
I said, when you're not here, are you in DC? Am I remembering that right?
Oh, no, when we're not here, we have a place in Florida.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, are there
So
the solar situation like down there? Do you see any?
Well, the sad thing about Florida is we did think about solar down there, but at the time there were no solar applications that were hurricane approved to be affixed over a clay tile roof. And now, of course, since then, they've come up with actually solar tiles that look like clay tiles. So if we ever have to do our roof over, that's an option. And I will say that we have thought about replacing our array here on Nantucket, and we've been counseled to wait a year or two because the next generation of panels is supposed to be much better and much more efficient. And they're expecting another round of kind of tax rebates and abatements to come through from the government. So when those two things are aligned, it'll be time for us to make that switch and upgrade. And
do you think you'll cover the whole roof plane?
Well, we'll see what we can do and see if we can tie it into a generator too, because I do think with these really kind of devastating storms that seem to be more frequent, it makes sense for us to think about like backup systems. And being on an island, there are times when you kind of feel like you're on your own, and to plan for that makes sense. So that's kind of on our 2-3 year lookout.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very interesting to think about. I think what Mickey was saying too, I've spoken with other homeowners and who have talked about how they've changed everything over to electric and how they were looking for, things that they had never, I think, was a musician and suddenly they were buying all sorts of interesting toys and things to plug in because there was so much energy that was being produced. I don't know. I love looking at these pictures of Mickey's array because I think this is such a great example about how something can blend in. And even if you have less space, I wonder, are we going to see people making modifications to their homes where they decide that they want an addition on an older home, and will they be doing that with an eye towards what might make sense for solar? I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Certainly people adapt historic structures all the time and add on additions. And I could even see where you had an addition that was running the length of the house. One of the things that we like to see when you're putting on an addition to a historic house is that you can't see it from the street. So if that was a case, would that secondary massing be the place to put solar?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I think about too, Mickey, is when I walk down India Street or these streets where the buildings are so high up off the ground anyway, are there roof planes there that you wouldn't necessarily be able to see it from the street? And as we're seeing more and more structures in the downtown Brant Point, Washington Street area, especially get lifted up to get out of the flood zone, suddenly those roofs are much higher up. So it'll be interesting to see if we start to see some of that. But I guess my last question for you before we take unless there's any questions from the audience, we'll take another little break before we hear from the students and professors with the Envision Resilience Challenge. Do you think, it's sort of a leading question because you all put solar on your homes, but do you think the solar energy, home solar installations can be compatible with a National Historic Landmark? Somebody this morning asked, well, is there a chance we're going to lose our landmark status? We've never, seen a landmark lose its status in the US, I don't think. But can it be done? Or what would you say to somebody who says that historic preservation and renewable energy don't mix?
Mary, I think we're already doing it. I think we're creating plenty of instances where it's not visible, even downtown, as in Barbara's case, and in the outskirts where it's either just marginally visible or not visible at all. I think there's still lots of opportunities where solar will be very appropriate. So that doesn't concern me. I think it's definitely got a future here.
Well, that's great. And I hope that there's people watching and people who will watch this later who may have been thinking that this is something they might want to try. It's great to talk to people who've been through it. I think all of your installations are different. All of your houses are so different, but it's great to hear that you went through this process and it's working out for you.
Yeah, for me, it was just so easy because they did everything.
Yeah,
I wrote the checks and they took care of all the paperwork and all of the submissions and getting it through HDC. So, and because they do it every day,
yeah.
I didn't have to really worry about it. And so it was a really easy, nice experience. And I love the fact that I'm doing my little part to preventing that, that third cable from needing to come over.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the question that I have is, can that third cable be stopped? But I don't know that anybody here has the answer to that. Great. Well, I think this is, we talked so much when we were talking about coastal resiliency and climate change, about looking at this problem, and it feels like it could be insurmountable. But I think what I've enjoyed so much about the discussions the last couple of days. It's just seeing, like Mickey said, there is a future for solar here, and it is already happening. And I think we only see in the newspaper when things go wrong, when something is denied. But the fact is there's a lot more that's being approved than is being denied. So I'm excited to see what applications might come before the HCC in the next couple of years. Well, I want to thank you all for your time this afternoon, for sitting with us here. And I think everybody will be driving around and looking for the hidden solar arrays on the island. And I look forward to seeing everybody in a couple of minutes at 2 o'clock for the Envision Resilience panel. So we'll see you back here then.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you all.
Thank you.